Tonight at 10, the Prime Minister apologises and says she accepts responsibility for the mistakes made, but she's not going anywhere. On the day that her new Chancellor completely tears up her economic plan, Liz Truss tells our political editor she is sticking around.
I do want to accept responsibility and say sorry for the mistakes that have been made.
And will you lead the Conservatives into the next general election?
I will lead the Conservatives into the next general election.
Another huge government U-turn as the Chancellor ditches almost all of Liz Truss's tax plans and warns of spending cuts to come.
This government will take the difficult decisions necessary to ensure there is trust and confidence in our national finances. That means decisions of eye-watering difficulty.
As the Chancellor took centre stage, the Prime Minister mostly kept a low profile, prompting MPs to ask if she was hiding.
The Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the
After a day in which the Prime Minister was barely seen and not heard, tonight she speaks exclusively to me for this programme. You'll see that interview in just a moment.
Also on the programme tonight, Russian forces launch waves of drone attacks on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Hundreds of Metropolitan Police are getting away with law-breaking and misconduct, says a new report.
I'm at the Roundhouse in London, where the winner of the Booker Prize for 2022 has just been announced.
And stay with us here on the BBC News Channel for continuing coverage and analysis from our team of correspondents in the UK and around the world.
Good evening. The Prime Minister says she is sorry and accepts responsibility for the mistakes that have been made in her tax-cutting plans, as her new Chancellor announced he was tearing almost all of them up. In an interview tonight with our political editor Chris Mason, Liz Truss acknowledged that her plans had gone too far and too fast, but said she had fixed the mistakes, appointed a new Chancellor and restored economic stability and fiscal discipline. It comes after the biggest ever U-turn in Britain's economic history. This gives you an idea of the scale of how much has been dropped from the Prime Minister's plan for growth unveiled by Kwasi Kwarteng less than a month ago. Everything in red has gone. The 1p cut in the basic rate of income tax has been dropped indefinitely. It will remain at 20p. The 2-year cap on energy prices has been drastically shortened. It will now last just 6 months until April next year and will be more targeted after that. And the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, made it very clear that there will be cuts in public spending, something the Prime Minister had insisted would not happen. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, accused the government of inflicting long-term damage on the economy. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is in Westminster. Chris.
Sophie, today was a day like no other that I have witnessed in the nearly 20 years that I have rattled around Westminster. Yes, of course, political leaders change their minds, as we all do, but never before on this scale and done so quickly. A Prime Minister just weeks into office, junking nearly the entire programme that got her elected to that office in the first place. And that's why so many on her own side are asking whether she has the credibility to continue, a question I put to her this evening. Inside 10 Downing Street tonight, today's Prime Minister in the corridors, those of yesterday on the wall.
Prime Minister, who is to blame for this mess?
Well, first of all, I do want to accept responsibility and say sorry for the mistakes that have been made. I wanted to act, but to help people with their energy bills, to deal with the issue of high taxes, but we went too far and too fast. I've acknowledged that. I've put in place a new Chancellor with a new strategy to restore economic stability. And now what I'm focused on is delivering for the public.
Let's be clear, though, and blunt. Your very vision for Britain is dead, isn't it?
What I'm focused on is delivering on energy supplies, on delivering new roads, new opportunities across our country, We have to make sure, though, that we have economic stability, and that has to be my priority as Prime Minister. I've acted in the national interest. I remain committed to the vision, but we will have to deliver that in a different way, and that's what I'm determined to do with the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. I do think it is the mark of an honest politician who does say, yes, I've made a mistake, I've addressed that mistake, and now we need to deliver for people. You know, what we've said we will deliver.
Was Rishi Sunak right all along?
Well, we had a very robust leadership campaign this summer where we debated ideas, we debated philosophy. And
he suggested your ideas would be a disaster, and he's been proven right, hasn't he?
Well, as I've said, I'm committed to a low-tax, high-growth economy. But I have to reflect the real issues we face, and my responsibility as Prime Minister is making sure that we have economic stability, that we protect people's jobs. We've got the lowest unemployment since 1974, and we get through this very difficult winter. What I have delivered is we've already reversed the national insurance increase, which is important for families. We've also delivered on the energy price guarantee. Yes, Chris, I couldn't deliver everything I wanted.
Well, not everything. Most of it's been junked.
Well, I delivered the energy price guarantee and the national insurance, and we will continue to work to deliver economic growth for our country.
Lots of people are facing massive increases in mortgage payments, and analysts say at least some of that is because of what you've done in the last 5 or 6 weeks. What do you say to them?
Well, look, I understand it is very difficult for families across the country.
And they're blaming you.
And the fact is we are facing both a difficult economic situation internationally where interest rates are rising, as well as pressure here in Britain.
But do you accept that you have made it worse?
Well, what we've been through over the last few years is a very low interest rate world, and that is changing, and that is changing across the globe.
But do you accept that what you've done in the last 5 weeks since you took office has made it worse for people? It's made it harder for people to pay their bills?
Well, first of all, I have said sorry for the fact that we did act too far. We went too far and too fast.
And that has consequences for people on people's bills.
But the reason I did that was to make sure that we were dealing with the immediate issue of the energy crisis, and we did help people with their energy bills.
Can you convince our listener and viewer that you have credibility still as Prime Minister? Because a reasonable-minded observer might wonder from here on in whether they can believe what you're saying, because so much of what you've said in your early weeks in office has been binned.
Yes, I have been honest with the public about what we've needed to change because of the circumstances, but I am completely committed to delivering for this country. And that's why I'm in the job. That's why I get up each morning, Chris. It's because I want this country to be a better place where everybody has opportunities and everyone can succeed. That's what motivates me.
Do you feel humiliated?
I feel, first of all, that I did make mistakes, and I've been upfront and honest about that. Yes, it hasn't been perfect. It's been a difficult time, and I think we did an interview before I got the job, and I said it was going to be tough because of the circumstances we're facing as a country.
Has it been harder than you could possibly have imagined?
I was expecting it to be tough, and it has been tough, I think it's fair to say.
And will you lead the Conservatives into the next general election?
I will lead the Conservatives into the next general election.
Definitely.
Well, look, yeah. I'm not focused on internal debates within the Conservative Party.
But you need to be, don't you? You need to be in order to stay in office.
The important thing is that I've been elected to this position to deliver for the country. We are facing very tough times. We simply cannot afford to spend our time talking about the Conservative Party rather than what we need to deliver. And that is my message to my colleagues.
First thing this morning, it felt like a government on the run.
Sorry about the rain, guys.
The new Chancellor was even apologising for the weather. Jeremy Hunt was jogging before Dawn even thought of braking.
Any more U-turns?
The answer was yes. News was already breaking. Mr Hunt was performing the last rites on almost all of Liz Truss's plans. Her programme for government, dead. Living hour by hour. This is what hand-to-mouth governing looks like. Camera crews were called to the Treasury, ministers so petrified by the pace of events, yanking big chunks of a massive announcement forward by a fortnight isn't enough. Even leaving it to this afternoon was too late for them. There was a statement filmed just after 11 o'clock too.
No government can control markets, but every government can give certainty about the sustainability of public finances.
And they're doing that by junking pretty much everything Liz Truss said she stood for.
We will reverse almost all the tax measures announced in the growth plan 3 weeks ago that have not started parliamentary legislation.
Cancelling a rise in national insurance and changes to stamp duty in England and Northern Ireland, the only bits held on to. The planned cut in income tax in England, Wales and Northern Ireland is off.
But at a time when markets are rightly demanding commitment to sustainable public finances, it is not right to borrow to fund this tax cut. So I've decided that the basic rate of income tax will remain at 20%, and it will do so indefinitely.
And that wasn't it. The very crutch against which the Prime Minister has leant through weeks of criticism, her help with energy bills for 2 years, that was being watered down too.
The Prime Minister and I have agreed it would not be responsible to continue exposing public finances to unlimited volatility in international gas prices. So I'm announcing today a Treasury-led review into how we support energy bills beyond April next year. There will be more difficult decisions, I'm afraid, on both tax and spending.
Stark and blunt. Taxes will be higher and government spending will be lower than was planned. By 3:30 this afternoon, Labour were demanding answers from Liz Truss. They tried to get her to turn up to the Commons, but she said no and sent along a cabinet minister instead.
With apologies to the Leader of the Opposition and the House, the PM is detained on urgent business. And
from the opposition parties here, derision.
How can Britain get the stability it needs when all the government offers is grotesque chaos? How can Britain get the stability it needs when instead of leadership we have this utter vacuum? How can Britain get the stability it needs when the Prime Minister has no mandate from her party and no mandate from the country?
Where on earth is the Prime Minister? And if she doesn't even have the backbone to show up here today, is there really any point in her showing up here again? Surely time's up. She needs to go and let the people decide.
For the damage and pain they have caused across our country, will the Leader of the House, on behalf of her whole party, address the people and businesses of our great country and apologise?
And this Labour MP suggested...
And all we know right now is, unless she tells us otherwise, that the Prime Minister is cowering under her desk and asking for it all to go away.
The Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the Honourable Lady.
Listen to the barracking and just look at Penny Mordaunt's facial expression. Wherever she had been, we finally did spot Liz Truss making her way to Parliament.
I know that the Prime Minister...
Just before 4:30, she arrived in the Commons. Her ministers shuffle along to make space for her, as a growing number on her own side wonder when she might shuffle off as Prime Minister.
Well, let's talk to Chris now in Westminster. And Chris, she did keep a very low profile today. You spoke to her tonight. What was her mood?
There was a tense mood in the building. You could feel that on arrival. But as far as my conversation with the Prime Minister was concerned, she was stoical, she was philosophical. She found time to point out some of the artwork on the walls, indulge in a splash of small talk before we started. But she knows her staff know, the dogs in the street know. She is seriously imperilled at the moment, and that's why she chose to talk to me tonight after that criticism all day long that she was barely seen and not heard. Her team have decided she has to come out and make an argument to stand up for herself and stand up for her Premiership. Why? Because there aren't many other people doing it. And also Jeremy Hunt and Penny Mordaunt, who you saw in my report there, they're talked about as two potential successors. They were making the argument today, so she's joined the argument as well. So that's where she finds herself tonight, and very strikingly saying at the end of our exchanges she does want to take her party into the next general election. You know what, I don't find many Conservative MPs who think that would be a good idea. One thing worth remembering though, there's rather a lot that Liz Truss has said in the last 5 or 6 weeks that's been overtaken by events.
Chris, for now, thank you. Well, the financial markets have reacted positively today after the government's third major U-turn in less than 4 weeks. So how much money has the government saved by ditching its tax cuts? And how big is the hole that's still remaining in the country's finances? Here's our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
The ink was barely dry on the growth plan, the official name for the mini-budget, when it began to fall apart in spectacular fashion. Measure after measure have dissolved within just days. And now, after 24 days, all the tax measures not already passing into law, along with one of its authors, have vanished from the government's agenda. It's not just a new chapter in economic policy, a complete rewrite. Actually, the biggest U-turn in British economic history. Let's look at how the mini-budget funding gap has changed. We start with the £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts announced at the mini-budget. The biggest single one, corporation tax, gone on Friday, worth £19 billion a year. And even before that, the scrapping of the 45p rate was itself scrapped. Gone, raising £2 billion. Today, another £7 billion in other tax cuts was scrapped, including things like a freeze on alcohol duty. Buy to that, leaving a £17 billion gap to fund. That is the stamp duty cut and the reversal of the rise in national insurance, here to stay. But then on income tax, Jeremy Hunt went even further than a mini-budget U-turn, not only cancelling the cut in basic rate income tax, that's gone next year, but getting rid of it into the future. That raises £5 billion a year, but incredibly leaves the self-proclaimed tax-cutting PM with a higher path for the basic rate of income tax than she inherited, partly due to that recent turmoil. Add all that, and she still leaves a hole of £12 billion. But look at this, the gap has actually grown by £20 billion, at least because the economy has been hit and we face higher interest rates, and not just because of the mini-budget. And that all means a large gap remains despite today, £30-ish billion. And so a squeeze on public spending, hard-pressed departments, perhaps big railway projects, welfare, even pension payments, nothing's off the table, we're told.
This has certainly helped us towards a much more sustainable public finance situation. The Chancellor also said he's going to be looking at spending. It's pretty unclear how much he'll need to do, but if he does much at all over the next 2 or 3 years, that will take us back to austerity because inflation has wiped out a lot of the increases that were announced last year. So any significant change to those spending plans will mean cuts to public spending budgets.
Why now? This was all about reassuring the markets as the Bank of England emergency parachute was withdrawn. And you can see from this chart today that shows the cost of 30-year government borrowing, it did have the desired effect, with those interest rates on government bonds coming down by ½ percentage point. But you can see that while today saw those yields come down, the cost of government borrowing is still higher than it was before the mini-budget over here, and higher than similar countries, suggesting an ongoing premium. But the big picture is that a further spiral up like this has been prevented as the credibility cup begins to fill again.
It was a relief to see what the Chancellor had to announce today, but certainly the measures that were tabled today are not enough to really cover the whole of the budgetary black hole. And for that we have to wait till the end of the month, on October the 31st. Now, that will give us more detail about what the government is going to do to balance this budget. That's going to be essentially very important for the market outlook.
And it's some of those government borrowing rates that we just saw feeding into things like fixed mortgage rates, the cost of business lending. Perhaps this stops that further increasing. But the flip side of that could be some millions of people facing the full market costs for energy bills from April and higher taxes too. And we're told there's more tough decisions to come.
Faisal Islam there. Well, the changes announced today from income tax to energy bills will have a direct impact on all our finances. So what do voters make of the U-turn? Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth has been to Warwickshire to gauge reaction.
In the Warwickshire countryside, this historic hotel and golf course, like many businesses, battled through the pandemic to be faced with rising bills and economic instability. Owner Rick has been a Conservative supporter, but he has long been losing faith in the government, saying it's overlooked hospitality businesses like his. And watching the Chancellor today left him far from convinced about what's ahead.
This government has been a pretty chaotic show, and they've got an awful lot of work to do to convince me that they really do know where they're going and what they're doing.
Do you have faith in Liz Truss and this government?
I've never felt less confident in a government in this country. Never.
Nearby, Nuneaton is a constituency that often reflects the national political picture. Currently Conservative, it has been Labour in the past. Some here say the Prime Minister should be given time.
She's not been here very long, she's not made a great start, but see how she goes. There's not much confidence in the government really at the moment, but I don't know who would be better to replace her. Give her a chance, I think, see what she can do, what she can bring to the table, but I think she's just got to try and find some trust in people.
Just off the high street, this cafe's been run by Sharon for the past 13 years. A Conservative voter, she's run out of patience with the government's changing position.
1 minute you've got one thing, and then the next minute you've got another thing. You just don't know whether you're coming or going. We've got Liz, and if she's not running the country, then she needs to go.
Do you think she is running the country?
Customers Sheila and Linda share a sense of frustration.
What the cock-eyed hell is going on? We've had one, Boris, 8. Now it's she's no good either. Haven't they got one good one between them all?
What do you think should happen now? Do you think Liz Truss can keep her job?
No.
Why not?
I don't believe anything she says now.
I don't think she's capable of running the country, and why they voted her in, I have no idea.
So whether there's a change at the top or not, the past few weeks certainly seem to have come with a political price. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Warwickshire.
Well, let's get more from our political editor, Chris Mason, and our economics editor, Faisal Islam. And Faisal, has the Chancellor done enough to keep the market stable for a while now?
Well, Sophie, this is a galactic-sized and utterly unprecedented U-turn, and whatever the political consequences, there are huge economic ones, both in the round and also for individuals. So the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has started the process of winning back the credibility of the markets. You can see that in the markets. Why does that matter? It means that the people that lend our country money, well, they're reassured and they're more likely to keep those flows of money going and keep them more cheaply going, and that will flow across the economy. So that's good news. But the flip side is less reassurance for those people dependent on government spending, whether it's welfare recipients, pensions recipients, public sector workers, those that want a new rail link near their home, or those dependent on the energy bailout lasting beyond April. That's more uncertain now, and it's difficult to make these decisions even if you have a strong government that's newly elected. Not the febrile situation we've been hearing about, and not what we just heard about today, which was the Chancellor acknowledging direct blame for one factor, which was that the government did not order an OBR forecast alongside its mini budget, something first reported on the BBC. So it raises the question, when these tough decisions are made, how much support will there be amongst the public, amongst MPs, amongst the Cabinet? Because although economic credibility seems to be coming back, the question of whether the Chancellor can get these tough measures through the political system, that matters too for economics. It's going to be a scary run-in to this Halloween budget.
And Chris Mason, Liz Truss was pretty defiant in your interview. She says she is taking the party into the next general election. Can she be that confident?
No, is the short answer to that. So she kind of had to say that, Sophie, in answer to my question, because the alternative would have effectively have been to put an end date or a time limit on her time in office, the very thing that plenty of her MPs want to see happen. What's really striking tonight is how unknowable the short term is. It's my job to try and tell you what's going to happen here, but also to be honest about when it's very difficult to be certain, and that's exactly where we are right now. In the longer term, I see next to no appetite from Conservative MPs for the Prime Minister to lead them into the next general election. But in the shorter term, there is some recognition that there's a new Chancellor in office and things might steady down a little bit. Plus, those who would like to see a new Prime Minister need to get their ducks in a row to work out who that might be, to try and make that as smooth as possible. Brackets, it won't be smooth. So that's what's going on right now. For the next few days, it'll continue to be really, really bumpy for the Prime Minister, because every time she appears in public, her record and her plan for government, junked, thrown into the Thames, will come back to her. Why will it come back to her? Because of that point around credibility. Can we believe anything she promises again?
Chris, Faisal, thank you both. And you can watch the whole of Chris's interview with the Prime Minister on BBC iPlayer. That's bbc.co.uk/iPlayer. Russia has attacked the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, launching waves of attacks using drones. The strikes killed at least 4 people, including a pregnant woman and her husband. Airstrikes have also hit critical infrastructure in 3 regions beyond the capital, cutting off electricity to hundreds of towns and villages. Among them is the area close to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, cutting it off from mains electricity. It's currently running on backup energy from a nearby coal-fired power station. Our correspondent Paul Adams reports from Kiev.
Ukraine's capital under attack again. Moscow determined to keep Kiev on the front line. The city's defenders equally determined to tackle the threat any way they could. But the drones came thick and fast. Of 28, 5 got through. 1 tore this elegant apartment building in 2. Half of it is gone. For one elderly resident, a narrow escape. Her balcony just a few feet from the impact.
We saw how this falls. It looks like something.
I think it's terrible. It's like a terrorist act. I heard it at 6 in the morning. I couldn't sleep all morning, and then I heard the second one. It just comes out of nowhere.
It's been a few hours since the explosion here in the middle of the city, but as you can see, there's still frantic rescue work going on. This is the second time in a week that the centre of Kiev has been hit. Among those who died here, a young couple. Victoria was 6 months pregnant. For the city's mayor, the aim of all of this is clear.
The target destroyed the whole infrastructure of Ukraine, destroyed infrastructure in our hometown. They less people freezing in the winter, less people do it without electricity. The Russians want to make the humanitarian catastrophe in our hometown.
And this a piece of one of the weapons used, Iranian-made so-called kamikaze attack drones, low-flying, hard to shoot down. Russia has used hundreds in recent weeks. Ukraine says it needs more help to deal with them. Offices of Ukraine's national energy company were hit today. Infrastructure facilities targeted outside the capital too. Moscow's assault on the fabric of daily life goes on. Paul Adams, BBC News, Kiev.
A Russian warplane has crashed into a residential area in the southern Russian resort town of Yeysk, close to the occupied Ukrainian city of Mariupol. At least 4 people have been killed, with several more missing. Russia's defense ministry said the plane crashed during a training flight from a military airfield due to an engine fire. Greater Manchester police are investigating after a pro-democracy protester outside the Chinese consulate in the city was dragged inside and beaten up. The attack happened yesterday afternoon, with the victim spending last night in hospital after being rescued by police officers. Both the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, and the former Conservative leader, Ian Duncan-Smith, have called for the Chinese ambassador to explain what happened. The new Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, has called for hundreds of his officers to be sacked after a report found many of them are getting away with criminal behaviour. The review of the Met's internal misconduct system was commissioned after the murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer. It says many claims of sexual misconduct, misogyny and homophobia by officers are badly mishandled, and there are unacceptable levels of racial bias. Here's our special correspondent, Lucy Manning.
The murder of Sarah Everard, the turning point, but the dangerous behaviour of some officers ongoing. When a police officer kidnaps, rapes and kills a woman, trust is forfeited. Too many allowed to get away with sexual harassment, racism, misogyny.
I have found in their internal misconduct system that it's not good enough, it's not quick enough, and it has racial disparity. And the force needs to accept that. The whole force needs to accept it. They mustn't deny it.
The report is clear. The Met system for dealing with its officers is not fit for purpose. It has a systemic racial bias and misses repeat offenders. One officer had 11 complaints against him, from assault to abuse to sexual harassment. He's still in the Met. Parm Sandhu was a chief superintendent. Black and Asian officers are 80% more likely to be accused of misconduct. She was one and sued for discrimination.
I absolutely was targeted because of my racial background and the fact that I had raised a misconduct issue many years before against another senior officer. And because of that, you then become targeted yourself, you become ostracised.
When two police officers take photos with the dead bodies of murdered sisters Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry, then share them with colleagues, it's clear too many unsuitable officers have been allowed to stay.
It's time now for change, and we need that, because when we're in trouble, the only people we can call are the police. And if you're not sure that they're going to be honest and true, we're all left in a terrible state.
From the Met's HQ, you can look out over London and the people the officers here are supposed to serve. But the failure over years and decades to get to grips with corrupt and dangerous officers have left that public at risk. The new commissioner admits hundreds of officers who should have been sacked are still in the Met, and it's appalling.
I'm so angry about how we've let so many people down. Just what you read about what women and non-white officers are suffering in the organisation, it's disgraceful, our feebleness in our response to that. And I apologise to them that we've let them down so badly, and I apologise to the public for what that means for them as well.
But for too many years, the Met has failed to police itself. Change is always promised, but so far has never come. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
All bird keepers in England, Scotland and Wales must now follow strict biosecurity measures by law after the government announced an avian influenza protection zone coming into force across Britain. 190 cases of bird flu virus have been confirmed in the UK since last October. It's the country's largest ever outbreak, affecting both wild birds and those on commercial premises. The Manchester United footballer Mason Greenwood has appeared in court charged with attempted rape. The 21-year-old is also charged with assault and engaging in controlling and coercive behaviour. The Scottish Government has set out its vision for the economy in an independent Scotland. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said the new nation would initially keep the pound before moving to its own currency when the time is right. She also pledged to rejoin the EU and said it was now glaringly obvious that being in the United Kingdom did not offer financial security. Opposition parties say there is not enough detail in her latest prospectus. Our Scotland editor, James Cook, reports.
Are you voting for independence or not? That's the question. And to help these voters and their fellow Scots answer it, Nicola Sturgeon has been setting out the economic case.
The UK economy is in long-term decline. The UK economic model is failing and failing badly. But in relation to an independent Scotland, people want to know. Indeed, people have a right to know this. Can we do better? Do we know how to do it? And will it be worth it?
Her answer, emphatically yes. But there were questions about checks on the border, when a new currency could be launched, how an oil fund would work, and more. Is it not simply a fact that the first years, perhaps even the first decades of an independent Scotland, would require tax rises, spending cuts, vast and expensive borrowing, or a combination of all of those.
Is this an easy path for any country? No, but it is one that we are able, doing it this way, to guide through a sensible approach consistent with our values.
Scotland already has some of the building blocks of an independent state, a parliament for a start. This document attempts to sketch out the economic architecture, but opponents say it's still not enough.
I don't think any of the circumstances about Scotland being able to be part of a strong United Kingdom have changed in terms of the questions that need to be answered. People are desperate to know exactly what it is that independence would actually mean. This paper doesn't provide that.
This isn't a plan for change. It isn't a solution to the Tory-made crisis at the UK. It's a plan for yet more crisis, a doubling down of crisis from the SNP.
But what about those voters? How do they feel about the independence debate?
Economically, yes, there's going to be the upheaval, but every country that got its independence, the first few years, had its upheaval because they had to set up central bank, they had to set up all the institutions.
Brexit isn't done yet. We're still feeling the pain for that. And I think financially, this is a terrible time to go for India Ref 2. We've got inflation running at 10-11%. Imagine the Hadrian's Wall border crossing.
But do you not think that we possibly have resources? We have a lot of wind in Scotland. Can we use this? Can we generate more power? Can we sell this power?
We've heard the Saudi Arabia of renewables, the state-owned energy company. These are all things the Scottish Government could have done and the SNP said they wanted to do, and they just haven't done. So how do we know that that's going to happen after independence as well?
But there's so many little things, and all they're asking you is, do you want to be independent or do you not? It's a yes or no question.
Yeah.
How difficult? That's a difficult thing to answer.
If they get a chance, because we are all waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on the legality of another referendum. James Cook, BBC News, Edinburgh.
And finally, the winner of this year's Booker Prize is The 7 Moons of Mali Almeida, written by the Sri Lankan author Shehan Karunatilaka. It is set during the Sri Lankan Civil War. He was awarded the prestigious prize by the Queen Consort at a ceremony in London tonight. And our culture editor, Katie Razzle, is there. Katie.
Good evening, Sophie, from London's Roundhouse, where we are celebrating this wonderful, darkly comic, magical realist ghost story set 30 years ago amidst the horrors of war. And the winner of the Booker Prize, Shehan Karunatilaka, joins me now. Congratulations. I wonder how it feels to join the likes of Salman Rushdie, Hilary Mantel, all sorts of amazing authors, and win this prize.
Well, look, I'm used to releasing books to little fanfare, and that's what I thought for this. I thought it'll come out, maybe some people might like it, and then we got the Booker long list, and that was phenomenal. And so every step the parties continued, and I was just going to have a drink and go home tonight, and this is fabulous. Yeah.
Turns out it's a better story than that, and you get to win. Now, as I said, it's a ghost story, and your protagonist wakes up dead on the first page of the novel and has to spend 7 moons, 7 days trying to find out who killed him and expose the horrors, the atrocities of war. How important is it for you to get the message of the Sri Lankan Civil War out to this wider audience now?
I wasn't thinking in those terms. I was writing a murder mystery, and it just seemed that every Sri Lankan atrocity, we never deal with it. We kind of just move on. And the idea of a ghost story where the dead get to speak, I just thought that was an absurd enough conceit for a novel. And that's really all I was doing. But yeah, 1989 was a particularly grim time in our history, which is forgotten by many, including people in Sri Lanka. So it was interesting to research that. Yeah.
Well, very many congratulations, and I'm sure people can't wait to read this novel. Shehan Karunatilaka, thank you very much, and back to you, Sophie. Thanks.
Katie, thank you. Time now for a look at the weather with Chris Fawkes.
Hi Sophie. Well, we've had some pretty big contrast weather-wise today. In the capital, lots of sunshine and temperatures reached 20 degrees Celsius. That's 4 degrees Celsius above average for the time of year. But in contrast to that, in Scotland, rain refused to let up in places. And there were some areas that just saw temperatures of 10 degrees today. The rain was brought out by this area of low pressure, which will be moving out of the way. And in its place, we're going to get an area of high pressure built in from the north. But with that comes some colder air toppling into Scotland. Low pressure to the southwest, meanwhile, will bring England and Wales milder air, but the threat of some rain on the way over coming days. Now, before we get there, overnight tonight, there'll just be a few showers left over for the northeast of Scotland. Otherwise, it's a dry picture. But with clear skies, it's a colder night with temperatures dipping down into low single figures. And I suspect there'll be some mist and fog patches developing as we head into the first part of tomorrow morning. Some of those could last the first hour or two, probably most widespread across parts of Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia and the south. But then lots of sunshine later in the day. There'll still be an odd shower left over for the northeast of Scotland, and some thicker cloud could threaten an odd spot of rain to Cornwall, but otherwise dry and mild again for England and Wales, temperatures 14 to 18 degrees. On Wednesday, we start to see that low pressure push bands of rain in from the southwest. So some rain for a time for parts of England, Wales, Northern Ireland. Scotland, northeast England should stay dry, but if anything, it's getting a bit colder here. Temperatures 9 to 12 degrees Celsius. Thursday, we see another band of rain, this one a bit more widespread, a bit more potent, heading northwards and eastwards. Something of a clearance in the south, with brighter skies following. And again, it's mild. 15 in Belfast. We're looking at highs again reaching around 18 or 19 degrees across parts of the south of the UK. Very mild for the time of year. Sophie.
Chris, thank you. And that is the BBC News at 10. There's more analysis of events at Westminster right now on Newsnight with Kirsty Warp, which is underway on BBC Two. There they are. The news, though, continues here on BBC One because it's now time to join our teams across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Good night.